Phase 2 of the Risk of Rain 2 Seekers of the Storm roadmap is finally here and has brought a bunch of changes with it. The star of the show this time is the False Sun boss fight, something that I'm sure many of you have struggled with. They had a few goals with how they approached these changes. First, they wanted the fight to stay difficult while getting rid of some of the confusion it had. The False Sun's attacks will be projected a little better, and its pathing has been improved so it stops doing that awkward backwards walk it does sometimes and also stops getting stuck on cover. I had the privilege to play this build early, and let me tell you that they absolutely have kept the difficulty of the fight. At least now I know what actually got me killed. On top of this, they added the adaptive armor that Mithrix and the Voidling use in their fights to the False Sun to protect him from being instantly bursted down. To help focus on the False Sun himself, they are lowering the amount of stone golem spawns during the fight and increasing the amount of pillars. I will say it isn't much though, and while there is definitely more cover, you still don't have that much to work with. The new projected attacks include a bigger wind-up time with his melee attacks, the crystals are much larger, the lunar pillars will now move around and are much harder to miss, and the laser, well, just see for yourself. That's everything for the False Sun fight this patch. It's hard to put logistical and concrete words to it since the changes are really up to personal feel. Personally, I don't think it's fully finished, but this is entirely due to the cover issue that plagues the whole fight. Try to think about how much cover the Mithrix fight has and how much the False Sun fight has. It's not even close. The laser is easier to avoid now, but has still gotten me killed a lot because of how much of the arena it removes your access to. The False Sun fight was not the only thing that is getting changed with this update. The Void Fields, an environment subject to constant disagreement, is getting some changes as well. These changes include a new feature that makes it so that the in-game timer will only progress while you're in the Void Fog, while you're charging one of the cells. If you're in the holdout zone, the timer will not progress at all. The ramp-up of damage from the Void Fog is apparently overall faster, but it will kill slower than the Void Fog in Simulacrum. I honestly couldn't tell much of a difference, but just be wary of that. And finally, the items monsters gain can be added earlier if you're taking too long to complete the cells. There's no specific numbers, as far as I'm aware, to how it decides when to add an item and when to add an enemy, but just know that it's no longer guaranteed to be alternating. Currently, there is a glitch where the Void Fields will advance the stage counter, but according to the patch notes, this is unintended and will be fixed sometime in the future. The enemies added with the Seekers of the Storm update also got a few updates. The Halcyonite won't be falling off the edge of the map anymore. Its whirlwind attack is much more controllable and also, airborne. Flying survivors will no longer be safe, and trust me, it's pretty difficult to dodge now. It's nothing crazy, but it's definitely better than launching itself off the map. On top of this, its hitbox is more accurate to its model, and each of the 3 shots from the laser attack will individually track the player. The Scorchworm also got a small change, with its health being lower and also making it more consistent to bait it out of the ground when you walk above it. Some of the item changes that came with the first phase of the roadmap were a bit extreme, so on top of the enemy changes, we'll also be getting a few tweaks to the particularly problematic items. The Unstable Transmitter no longer has one-shot protection and can be activated only once per stage. Also, the barrier you gain has been reduced from 75% to 35%. My honest opinion is that this item is still super weird when compared to the rest of the cast of items. I think it's fine. I've heard from people smarter than me that they call it overpowered, but I don't know. It was never a big deal for me. An item that was a pretty big deal for me though was the Growth Nectar, which is having its stat increase per active buff decreased from 7% to 4%. I still think that this item will be pretty strong, but this nerf should make it a little less insane. The Elusive Antlers now no longer give you a base movement speed increase and instead only gives you increased movement speed when you collect the orbs. I honestly don't get this change that much. Maybe the antlers were a bigger issue than I thought, but this still feels a bit unnecessary. The Warped Echo's reduced damage is now down to 20% from 30%, but on the bright side, the additional ticks of damage will finally activate on damage items like Planula Razorwire and the Roll of Pennies. I personally always wanted this, so it's super cool to see it finally be part of the item like it always should have been. The War Bonds honestly didn't get hit as hard as it probably should have, but they no longer have a proc coefficient. improvement. Additionally, the cost of the additional charges of missiles has been doubled, but I don't think this will make that much of a difference. The breaching fin received a much needed nerf. The increased damage per bounce is now only 10%, and the additional stack will only add 10% as well. This really isn't that big a difference, but it was definitely needed. The bolstering lantern had its attack speed increase reduced from 10% to 7.5% per enemy within its range. This won't change much. The sonorous whispers has been tweaked to give it a higher chance to drop white items instead of higher rarities. The long-standing solitude has had a slight rebalance of its gold to XP ratio, and finally, the chronic expansion beep has had its volume lowered. Thank God. There were, of course, a multitude of bug fixes with this update, but none of them were really that important or interesting to address, with the exception of them actually removing the electric boomerang/samurai glitch for real this time. I don't know who told them, but just know that you're on thin ice. And finally, they mysteriously added this note that says that there is a new way to access the Path of the Colossus. They did not tell us playtesters this, and when I asked about it, this was the response I got, so look out for that, I guess. New stuff is exciting, and I'm honestly super happy that they are still doing fun, whimsical things like this beyond just logistical stuff. If you do know what the change was, feel free to put it in the comments and I'll pin your comment maybe. Anyways, that's all for the video. This isn't the content I usually make, but I like keeping the Risk of Rain 2 portion of my audience up to date when I can. But yeah, I'm not gonna draw this one out, so bye-bye.